My name is Rachel. I'm 33 years old, and until recently, I thought I had everything figured out. I was married to Mark, 5 years older than me, for 7 years. We had a stable life together, or so I thought. But now, I'm living with my mother, Sarah, and trying to piece my life back together. It all started 2 years ago when Mark and I built our dream house. We had always talked about settling down in a place of our own, a cozy, welcoming home. At the time, Mark had just started a new job, and while our finances were tight, we figured it was the perfect time to take the plunge. We didn't have much savings, but we managed to secure a mortgage. Mark had left his previous job at a major corporation. He had once thrived there, but everything changed when a new boss took over. His boss was a master of psychological torment, small, insidious comments that chipped away at Mark's confidence. I remember the sleepless nights, watching him toss and turn, unable to find peace. Eventually, he couldn't take it anymore and took a medical leave. The 3-month leave stretched on with no improvement, and finally, Mark resigned. For a while, we survived on just my income. I was working in a small marketing firm, and though it wasn't much, it was enough to get by. Mark, unemployed and struggling with his mental health, slowly started to recover. I could see the spark return in his eyes as he began to eat more, sleep better, and even crack a few jokes. His psychiatrist said he was on the mend, and I believed it. My loving, upbeat husband was coming back. After 2 months of job hunting, Mark found a new opportunity at a smaller company. The salary wasn't as high as before, only about 2/3 of what he used to make, but he seemed genuinely happy for the first time in a long while. "This is better than being stuck at that horrible place," he'd say, grinning. His enthusiasm was contagious, and despite the financial challenges, I felt optimistic. We had always dreamed of starting a family, but we knew that wasn't possible with our financial situation. We discussed it often, and though we both wanted children, the timing was never right. We made peace with the idea that it might just be the two of us, focusing instead on building our careers and enjoying each other's company. Just when we thought life was stabilizing, disaster struck. My mother, Sarah, was in a terrible car accident. She survived, but was left paralyzed and confined to a wheelchair. My heart broke seeing her like that, but I knew we had to do something. She couldn't live alone in her old 2-story house anymore. At first, I didn't know what to do. Mark, ever the problem solver, suggested, "Why don't we move her in with us?" The idea caught me off guard. I wasn't sure how my mother would react, but to my surprise, she was open to it. And so, with a new purpose, we decided to build a house that could accommodate her needs. We applied for a mortgage, even though we knew it would be tough. Mark had only been at his new job for a few months, and our finances were still shaky. But we were determined, and after being rejected by several banks, we finally found one that was willing to take a chance on us. It felt like a miracle. The house was perfect. We designed it with my mother's wheelchair in mind. Wide hallways, ramps, everything she needed to move around comfortably. I could already picture her sitting by the large windows, soaking in the sunlight. For the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. But that hope was short-lived. The land on which we built the house was a gift from Mark's grandfather. Mark's family wasn't wealthy, but his grandfather adored him. The land was a blessing. It meant we didn't have to pay for the property, which helped us afford the house. However, the land came with a price of its own. It was only a 5-minute walk from Mark's family home. At first, I didn't think much of it. Mark's mother, Linda, and his sister, Jessica, had always been distant, but I assumed they would be happy for us. I was wrong. When we told them that my mother would be moving in with us, Jessica sneered, "Why is your mother moving in too? How shameless." Linda added, "Isn't it awful that Mark has to take care of your mother now? You're a burden." Their words stung, but Mark stood by me. "It's our house," he said firmly. "Grandpa gave me the land, and we'll decide who lives here." I was grateful for his support, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a bigger problem. As time passed, the tension with Mark's family grew worse. They would show up unannounced, often making snide comments about the house or my mother. One time, Jessica brought her husband along, and despite the rain, They walked through the house in muddy shoes, ignoring the slippers we had laid out. "It's no big deal," Jessica laughed. "You can just wipe the floors later." I was furious, but I bit my tongue for Mark's sake. He had enough on his plate without me adding to it. Still, I couldn't help but feel the cracks forming in our once perfect life. Things finally came to a head one evening. We had invited Mark's family over for a housewarming party, hoping to smooth things over. But instead of celebrating with us, they made it clear that they didn't respect our home. Linda walked through the rooms, eyeing everything as if it belonged to her. When she saw the room we had designed for my mother, she said, "I'm fine with this room. I want to live here." I couldn't believe my ears. "This room is for my mother," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Linda smirked. "Well, your mother's lucky. That accident worked out well for her, didn't it?" The words hit like a punch to the gut. My mother, sitting quietly in the corner, looked down, her eyes filled with sadness. I was shaking with anger, but before I could say anything, Mark stepped in. "What did you just say?" His voice was low, but there was a dangerous edge to it. "There are things you just don't say, Mom. I can't believe you'd stoop that low." Jessica, ever ready to escalate things, jumped in. "Oh, come on, Mark. Don't act like a big shot just because you built a house. You're still just a loser with a jinx for a wife." The room went cold. I could see the hurt in Mark's eyes, and it broke my heart. He didn't deserve this. "I think it's time for you to leave," Mark said quietly. "We're done here." Linda and Jessica left, but their presence lingered in the air like a dark cloud. I knew that this wasn't the end of the conflict. It was only the beginning. A few months later, when we were finally starting to adjust to our new life, the unthinkable happened. One day while I was at work, I got a call from my mother. Her voice was panicked. "Rachel, it's Mark. He collapsed at work." My heart dropped. I grabbed my things and rushed to the hospital, hoping, praying that it was a mistake. But when I arrived, the scene in front of me felt like a nightmare. Mark was unconscious, hooked up to machines, his face pale. The doctors told me he had suffered a brain hemorrhage. They didn't know if he would wake up. I stood there, frozen, unable to process what was happening. This couldn't be real. Just that morning, Mark had been fine. We had plans to go to the movies that weekend. How could everything change so quickly? And then, just like that, Mark was gone. My world collapsed. At the funeral, Linda and Jessica arrived, not with sympathy, but with venom. "You did this, didn't you?" Jessica spat. "Did you poison him for the insurance money?" I was too numb to respond. It was as if they were determined to break me, to see how far they could push before I shattered. After the funeral, things got worse. I came home one day to find all of our belongings gone, replaced with unfamiliar furniture. Jessica and her husband were sitting in the living room, acting like they owned the place. "What is going on?" I demanded, my voice trembling with anger. Jessica smirked. "We're taking over. You can leave now." I was stunned. "This is my house. You have no right." "We sold your stuff," she said casually. "Got a good price for it, too. You can take your boxes and go." I was livid. They had sold everything. Everything Mark and I had built together. Everything we had cherished. I couldn't let them get away with this. I called the resale company and explained the situation. Thankfully, they agreed to return our items, but the damage had been done. My home, my sanctuary, had been violated. As I stood in the empty house surrounded by boxes, I knew I couldn't stay. Mark's family would never leave us alone. It was time to move on. With the life insurance money Mark had left us, I found a new apartment for my mother and me. It wasn't the dream house we had built together, but it was safe, and it was ours. I cut ties with Linda and Jessica, vowing never to let them back into my life. Months passed, and I heard rumors about Mark's family. They had lost everything. Jessica and Linda were now living in public housing, causing trouble wherever they went. I didn't feel sorry for them. They had brought this on themselves. As for me, I found peace in my new life. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was one I could live with. I knew that Mark would want me to move forward, to find happiness again. And so, with his memory in my heart, I did just that.